Welcome to Liberate University. Liberate University is free educational content released for the benefit and enjoyment of all. Many thanks to our gracious family of world-class practitioners for sharing their work.
Good afternoon, and welcome to another episode of Liberate University. My name is Justin, and today we're going to be talking about how to connect with angels and fairies for healing and guidance. Welcome, welcome. Please have a seat. No, it's all right. Join if you like. If you need to get up and go, it's totally fine. Feel free.
Will you do another?
Sure. Yeah. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Liberate University. My name is Justin, and today we're going to be talking about how to connect with angels and fairies for healing and guidance. All right. Well, welcome. Thank you for being here. If at any point you need to go, you need to use the restroom, any of those things, feel free. You won't offend me at all. Be yourselves. Be at liberty to do whatever you want. We are at Liberate after all. So, okay. So I'm just going to jump in and tell you a little bit about me to begin. I kind of fell into this wonderful, perspective or way of looking at life when I was a child, going through the tribulations of childhood, as many of us do. And I think that perhaps my first interest in all of this began when I used to have nightmares as a child. And that sort of made me very aware that there were other things going on in the world that I couldn't see. My parents were convinced that my nightmares were just dreams, things in my head. And I experienced them as something a little bit more real. And also too, as all children are, we'll see as we get into it today, children are connected to our multidimensionality in a way in which as adults, sometimes we lose. So being a child, I had my sort of awareness in some of the other dimensions in a way that I guess maybe my parents didn't. And I think that was really sort of the first place that my mind started thinking about, oh, they think one thing and I think another thing. Their experience is different from my experience. And I learned very quickly from the adults around me and the world at large that those things were part of imagination, and they weren't real. So when I would watch television and cartoons and I would see magical creatures and witches and warlocks and fairies and angels and you name it, I immediately associated them with my inner reality. And then also too, when I would do things like go to church or hear people talk about spirituality or religion, to me, there was always a correlation between all of those unseen things. So I started on that journey at 8. I became really interested in like the occult and witchcraft and mythology and that kind of stuff. And then at 16, my mom gave me a book by a lady called Louise Hay. It's called You Can Heal Your Life. And Louise Hay recently passed away in the last couple of years, but she has one of the largest New Age publishing companies in the world. And it exists just down south in California. Anyways, that was my first introduction to self-help. And from there, I got into tarot and meditation and healing, and it just went on and on and on. I have another life, so to speak, and I'll say another life because it's all integrated anyway, where I pay the bills mostly by doing other things. But this world for me is also just as real and has been probably the place in which I have devoted the most energy and time. So I could say probably I have more training and education in this than I do in everything else I've ever done. And it's just been because of my own interest in it. All right. So just to kind of jump off here, so it's not all about me, angels and fairies. So what are angels and fairies? I mean, I feel like they exist in our cultural archetypes in very sort of obvious ways. We've heard about them. We've seen them. They're in the media, they're in the news, blah, blah, blah. Maybe we've had experiences with them. Maybe we believe in them or we don't believe in them. But what really are they? How can we sort of like bubble them down to their sort of essentialness? And so to start, what I'll say is that angels and fairies exist in many different cultural traditions all across the planet. They are archetypes and they go by different names. But when we say angels, generally from this cultural point of view here in the United States at this time in our history, we tend to think of the Judeo-Christian model of fairies, of angels, and a similar Western mythology of fairies. But they do exist in every culture under different names and different archetypes. I would say the main difference you'll find between angels and fairies is that angels are considered to be the non-physical beings that can take physical form, that have a direct connection to source, God, goddess, creation, the all. Any name that you would give to God or the universe would be what we would say angelic energies are directly connected to. They have a direct connection. A typical example of an angelic force would be, let's say, the Archangel Michael, which Michael's probably one of the most famous sort of Judeo-Christian angels. But again, angels exist in many different cultures under different names, different archetypes. Fairies tend to be more connected to nature, the earth, Gaia, Terra, any name that you want to give the planet. Humans, extraterrestrials, a connection to the things that are what we would maybe consider three-dimensional. As I get into talking about angels and fairies a little bit later, I'm going to talk a little bit about dimensionality, which is just for me, it's a fancy way of talking about how there are different ways in which we perceive. And when we begin to perceive, how we can perceive different things based on our sensitivity and our cultivation. So almost like ways in which I like to think about perception and the mind is like flexibility of the body. So let's say you're doing a yoga class, and in the beginning of your yoga practice, for the very first time, you can't do a split. You just can't do it. Maybe you can because you're naturally flexible, but there'll be some people who can't. But then as you work at it, you become more flexible. Same thing with, let's say, cardiovascular fitness, any of those things. The more you sort of practice them is the more that the experience you have begins to change. So you may want to do a split. You might have a sense in your body of what a split might feel like. But until you actually experience the split, you don't really have the full sensational experience of it. Similarly to like cardiovascular fitness, like maybe you're going up the stairs and you're out of breath, and then you work on it, and then one day you're able to sort of run up and down the stairs. You're at Runyon Canyon, like running with people who are running uphill, and it's a whole new experience. So and what used to be, let's say, painful or uncomfortable becomes exhilarating and fascinating. You want to do it. And so that's a really great way I like to think of dimensionality, is that as you sort of do your mental workout or mental, spiritual, soul connected workout, your mind and your ability to perceive actually expands. And you're able to experience things that you haven't experienced before, or you experience them with a clarity with which you haven't experienced them before, or you experience things that you thought like were there but needed confirmation for, and then finally you get to experience them. All right, so I'll talk a lot. If at any point I'm overkill, you'll be like, I got it. You can let me know. And if at any point you have any questions, don't be shy to interrupt me. Just stick your hand up, yell out, let me know. I'll hand you the microphone and we'll get to it. So don't be shy. All right, so we're just gonna jump right into connecting with angels and fairies. Why? Why would you connect to angels and fairies? Well, being that angels have a direct connection to source, and fairies are also connected to the deeper understanding of existence, these are reasons why you might actually want to connect with these forces, because they can provide guidance, they can provide healing, or maybe a better way of saying it is they can facilitate you healing yourself, if that makes sense. It will as we go along. And, you know, in that you can have healing, guidance, forgiveness, grace, mercy, joy, anything that's really going to lift your life up and take it to a new level. That's a reason to reach out to an angel or fairy. Okay, so first thing is setting the mood. And I always love this idea of setting the mood. This sort of like in the brackets is quieting the mind, or ritual. So ritualizing something kind of, have you ever heard of Pavlovian training where a dog has a Pavlovian response to you ring the bell at mealtime and the dog salivates? So our minds actually tend to work that way. We make correlations between certain events and then what will occur. So let's say if every time we're going to have a meal, someone rings a bell, then when we hear the bell, it might make us hungry. Similarly to getting into a sort of ritualized process around getting to a deeper state of mind to connect to angels and fairies automatically starts dropping you down into a more quiet, conscious space. So ritual really is a kind of, I like to think of it as a choreography or a way of doing things that helps you slow down, that helps you plug back into yourself, into your divine connectedness. So I love candles, incense, just kind of setting the tone, whether it's day or night. Some of us are very sensitive to light, so closing the curtains, whatever works for you. This is purely up to what you feel. Take it as it's your own magical space, so you create it as you want. One of the things I like to do is I like to smudge. I don't do it all the time, but I do it sometimes. I'll smudge. I'll use Palo Santo or sage to really help clear the space out. If that's something you're familiar with and you want to try, absolutely go for it. Music, you'll notice I have a little music playing in the background here. I've got my candle on, incense going. And these are really just ways to kind of signal to me, and hopefully you, but also to kind of signal to the space that we're opening a kind of divine portal into which we are going to invite wisdom, connectedness, and we're going to open ourselves up in a way that when we go out, let's say into the world, we're not open in that way, because then we're sort of absorbing everyone else's energy and thoughts and whatever they're going through, all of a sudden then we're going through it. So that's another function of ritual, is that ritual creates sacred space, which kind of creates a barrier of protection so that you can become more open. And that might not necessarily be how you want to be when you go out into your regular everyday life. So those are my reasons for wanting to set the mood. Plus, I just think it's nice, like candlelight, and it smells good. Like anything that's going to make you feel good is great. Another wonderful thing to do is to take a salt bath. That really helps to clear your energetic body. And that also helps to calm you down. If you do Epsom salts along with calcium chloride real salt in your bath water, you'll get some of the benefits of absorbing the magnesium, which will help you be calmer as well. So we come at it from every angle we can, physiologically, mentally, and spiritually. All right, so setting the mood. Then other ways in which you can create mood for yourself don't necessarily have to be physical manipulations or ritual. You can go out into nature. Nature naturally has these qualities. So it tends to buffer out negative energy, unless you happen to be in a natural spot that you can feel that the energy isn't really resonating in I'll call it a highway. So that there's some places that you go to in nature and they'll make you feel scared. You'll feel like the energy isn't right. And they do exist. So when you come upon them, if you get these sensations, I call them warning sensations, and that might not be a place you want to hang out. But by and large, nature is a very friendly, buffering environment. And as long as you're somewhere that you feel safe, then I say that this is a really great place to go to connect to angels and fairies, particularly fairies. Other ways in which you can sort of set the mood and quiet the mind. These deal a little bit more with quieting of the mind. Breathing. Breathing is really essential. It is considered in many esoteric traditions to be probably one of the most effective, if not the most effective ways to begin to connect to source within yourself and to quiet your mind. Simple breathing exercise. It doesn't have to be complicated pranayama in the yogic tradition. It can just be elongating your inhalation, holding your breath, and then elongating your exhalation. I like to just count and maybe do 5 counts inhalation, 5 counts holding the breath, and 5 counts exhalation. Generally what I'll do is I'll try to make the exhalation a little bit longer than the inhalation and the period for which I hold it. So breathe in for 5, hold for 5, exhale for 7. And that has a tendency to really slow the mind down and make the body actually start to slow down. So physiologically, the heart rate, the parasympathetic versus sympathetic nervous system, it really actually transmutes you on a physiological chemical level. Great. Then some of the other ways to connect are prayer and affirmation. And I like to put those two together because prayer does, depending on where we're coming from, have the connotation of belonging to religion, which usually is very codified and tells you this is the way that it's supposed to be done. These are the things that you are supposed to say. I like to think of prayer as being a little bit more elastic and related to affirmations. Affirmations are anything that we say in the positive, that are designed to make us feel better and resonate. They're ways for conditioning the mind and our energetic body. So I am love is an affirmation, as opposed to one day I'm going to feel love, because this isn't really set in the present. And if it will say, today I will not be angry, really what the sort of thinking mind attaches itself to is angry, because that's the trigger word. But if I say peace, today I am peaceful, then it sets it in the present moment, and it sets the word peace as the sort of thing that the mind latches onto. A way I like to think about this is we don't live in a no universe. We live in a yes universe. So when it comes to the functioning of the mind, you've heard the old adage, what you resist persists. So if there's something that's coming up for you mentally that you're working on, when you resist it, when you go, no, literally your mind goes, okay, I'm going to give you more of that. It's total reverse psychology. It's like when you tell a child, don't go in that room. What's the first thing they do is they go right in the room. So really, when this happens to the mind, when you find yourself sort of grasping onto something that you don't want to grasp onto, you don't try to correct it. You just focus on something else that's positive. So that's how I like to think of prayer and affirmation, is about taking your mind and allowing it to say yes to something that you'd like to say yes to, as opposed to trying to fix or correct something that's really charged for you. So let's say you are working on something and you're like, I'm going to make it right. Actually, what can be very beneficial is just letting that thing be for a moment and focusing on something that doesn't have quite as much of a charge, and getting your mind into a positive state. Like, I really like how soft the pillow is in my bed, or I really like the temperature in this room, or today is a great day for me, whatever it is that's working for you. But prayer and affirmation, sort of putting it in that context so that when we come across it, there's a little bit of background and how our mind might work and a way to focus that helps us get into a place that doesn't create anxiety. Because when we're trying to fix things with prayer or affirmations, it tends to create more resistance. So if there's something that you're working on, one of the ways in which I like to sort of approach it initially is to step away from it, to let it be, and to start getting your mind to a place where it's feeling good and in positive vibration. Then eventually what happens is when you elevate your mind and your vibration to a different level, when the time comes for this thing that you're working on to come back into your energy field, you're able to perceive it and handle it from a different level of vibration. Whereas when you're at the level of the problem and you're trying to fix it, you have no tools. You're in the place where you're stuck. So this is the reason for sort of taking your mind up here, your energy vibration up here, so that when that thing that you're working on comes back through your energy field, you're seeing it from a different perspective. You're more empowered. And again, that is how prayer and affirmation works in regards to angels and fairies. You put yourself into that mindset where you're sort of, it's like going to the supermarket and choosing what foods you're going to put into your body. So same way you're choosing what thoughts and vibrations you're going to resonate with, you're going to hold on to and use over and over again. All right, then meditation. Again, this is all about quieting the mind, getting the mind to vibrate at a higher level, because when we get to a more quiet mind, to a more high vibratory state of mind, we're able to hear and communicate with angels and fairies more easily. Meditation. So meditation classically is just quieting the mind. There's 10 million different ways to do it. None of them are wrong. I recommend finding one that works for you. It can be as simple as going for a walk. It can be as complicated as doing Vipassana for 10 days in silence. Totally up to you. I won't give you a talk on meditation because this isn't a talk on meditation. But I do recommend it because meditation is the workout for your mind that you would give the workout for your body when you go to the gym. The more you meditate is the more quiet your mind will be in general, just like the more you exercise, the better your fitness will be in general. Other ways to actually quiet the mind, or let's say raise the vibration of your mind-body complex, is playing, being in joy, singing, dancing, anything that brings you joy. Writing if you like writing, yelling if you like yelling, hiking if you like hiking. Anything that you enjoy that brings you joy is a great way to raise your vibration. And it will also help to cancel out the worry, static noisiness of the mind, because joy is a very, very clear, open vibration where the mind is quiet and the experience of joy is what takes over. So play and joy, they go hand in hand. Another way to connect is if you have children, or if you work with children, or if you're just observing children. Generally speaking, children are at a much higher vibratory level. They're more connected to what's happening in the other dimensions. And their way of seeing, their way of interacting with nature and other people is very open. And just by observing a child or working with a child or being with your child, your niece, your nephew, whoever it is in your life, you can connect to this state of mind by being in their presence. So that's another way. And it's also connected to joy, because children really know how to play much better than us adults do at times. Okay, so that kind of gives you an idea of setting the mood and quieting the mind. So how do we contact angels and fairies? Like, how is this going to happen? Like, well, first thing to understand is that you've been doing it your entire life, whether or not you know it. And angels and fairies are archetypes, and like us, so here is something that's probably been talked about ad nauseum. You might have heard it, or you mightn't have heard it, but it's like, oh, we're all one being, and we are just a wave in the ocean of existence. So angels and fairies are the like, you could say. Not only are we waves in the ocean of existence, but angels and fairies are waves in the ocean of existence, or the ocean of non-existence, depending on how you're looking at it. So if you feel that you were connected to your intuition, it's not really different from being connected to your higher self, from being connected to an angel and being connected to a fairy. So I could say that I am connected to all of you, which from one level of existence would be very true. And from another level of existence, you would say, well, you can see that we are clearly separate. So what are you talking about? That's absolute rubbish. But you don't lose your identity, and I don't lose my identity. But our connection also is not untrue. So it's kind of like what you would say in quantum physics is superposition. The quality of a particle to act like a particle or like a wave. So you could say that when we look at something which is very scientifically based, quantum physics, quantum mechanics, superposition, we're all two things or multiple things at the same time. The same applies to angels and fairies. So you have all been connected to them by virtue of that principle, but by virtue of the fact that when you call out, or when you've called out, or when you play as a child, when you make believe, you're immediately connecting. So there are no wrong ways to do this. Desire is just enough. But a really great template for this is, imagine that your body is a computer and your brain is the processing chip. And actually what's really interesting is that all computer chips have silicone in them. And because of the behavior of silicone that we look at using the quantum physics technologies that we have, that is actually what makes a computer chip work. And that premise of superposition, this ability of particles to act like waves and other quantum mechanics, is what allows a computer chip to function. So you can think of it as like the computer chip is your brain. It works in these two different ways. So it works in the physical, physiological way, and then it works to sort of act, your body and your brain to act as like a matrix, a connection template for the divine. And the divine is the internet. So the only difference is that in real life, we sort of have to plug in or connect via Wi-Fi for our computer to be connected. For us, we're always connected, but we can obscure that connection. And, or we can sort of cloud over that connection. We can never completely disconnect. We can have an experience of complete disconnection, but we can never be completely disconnected. So if I say, imagine a computer that's not connected to the internet. It has certain capabilities, but it doesn't have the same level of resources or capabilities that a computer connected to the internet does. So that's one way of looking at it. And we will do things to ourselves sometimes that shuts down that connection or creates the illusion that we're not connected, which then allows us to feel like we're on an isolated system, which is generally what most people in our world experience, is a very sort of three-dimensional, disconnected reality that sometimes links to the internet. However, we're always connected to our source. And one of the ways that we're always connected is very simple. It's called imagination. And our traditional perspective of imagination, at least when I grew up, was that imagination is something that exists in your mind, and it's a place where you make believe, and things there are imagined. So if I say, imagine a unicorn, then you're imagining a unicorn and it's not real, right? If I say, imagine what you had for dinner yesterday and you can remember it, then you're remembering it. If I say, imagine what you would like to have for dinner tonight, and you imagine it, and you imagine it. Let's say you're working on something like you are writing a song, and you've got some of the notes and you've got some of the words, and you know that you're going to finish this project and one day it's going to be out there. You even heard some of the melodies, maybe you sang it a little bit, there's stuff on the paper, you played some of the chords, all of that kind of thing. So this is something that's becoming, and imagine it becoming. Everything in this room, everything that you can see, your clothing, the ceiling, even your body at some point, was an idea in the mind of someone else. It was in someone else's imagination. So even if it was sort of accidental, let's say you were accidentally conceived, when that conception happens, immediately the imagination starts filling in the blanks. Is it going to be a boy or a girl or a non-binary? Like what child am I going to have? What's the child's life going to be? How will the existence unfold, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So imagination is the place from which all manifested reality comes. Everything that you're seeing that we create is coming from the imagination. So all of the things that you could say are human created have come out of our imagination. Now we can talk about the natural world, the planet, the stars, that kind of stuff. And the way that I like to look at this is, how do you experience reality? You experience reality through your thoughts, through your feelings, and through what I like to call sensations. And sensations include your five senses. So what you see, smell, taste, touch, and hear. And then extensions of that sense of touch are what I like to call sensations. So when you feel angry, or when you feel sad or guilty, or you have an emotion, you're having a sensation. And usually you can locate that sensation in your body in some place. You have a nerve that runs from your brain all the way down the front of your body, right down here into the diaphragm area, called the vagus nerve. And this nerve tends to be where we have the physical manifestations of emotional energy. So you hear people say, I could feel it in my gut, anxiety. It also runs right through the heart area. So it's connected to these sort of sensorial centers in the body. Now, everything in life that you experience, what you're seeing with your eyes, what you're hearing with your ears, what you're feeling through your body, is all coming through some sort of receptor. And it's a little impulse, let's call it an electrical impulse, that goes along a nerve and then goes into your brain, and then your brain interprets it. So let's say I see a red fire truck, and it's actually light molecules going into my eye, through the lens, hitting the retina, going on the optic nerve, going into my brain. My brain interprets it as an image, turns the image the right side up because the lens in my eye sees it upside down. And then I say I'm seeing a red fire truck. For me to actually know if it's actually there, even if it hits me as I'm crossing the street, is all based on perception. And what is actually there and what I interpret that's there may be two very different things. And a sort of classic example of this in a little bit of a softer focus way is like how people remember events. So that's sort of one way of knowing how the brain sort of changes things. Or if there's, let's say you're in a court and they're talking about something that's happened, and they'll have eyewitnesses. Usually eyewitnesses see very different things. So what is actually there and what we perceive is something that we really don't have a solid answer for. Like scientifically, we can say, yes, we understand these things if we are taking for granted that our interpretation of what we're seeing is actual, which works for the vast majority of what we deal with in our lives. Like, yes, it's bacteria. You should take antibiotics and therefore you get better. So it's not that these things don't serve us, but at the very basic level, they're interpretations. So you can say, based on this premise, that everything that you see is an interpretation. Everything that you experience is going through that facet of mind that interprets, which is the same facet of mind we know as imagination. So imagination is actually much more real, or I like to expand the definition of imagination. And if imagination is what allows us to create, then it also, by definition, is connected to divine source. So when you plug into imagination, you are plugging into your internet. And the sort of boundaries of these things, I like to say, are not hard, but they are soft, and osmosis and diffusion happens through them. So there is more of an ocean with the ideas of delineation. And so when we're talking about angels and fairies, I go through this really long-winded explanation to get to the point that angels and fairies, by virtue of connecting to your imagination, by just dreaming up and thinking things, is not absurd. It's actually quite concrete. And it's how we tend to use our mind to produce the world that we see around us. So now that you have that out of the way, you can kind of erase those little like, well, I just made it up. Yes, you did. But is there really any difference between what's real and what you make up? So that's a question for you to ponder, an existential question that people have asked forever and ever. So getting back to the task at hand, which is connecting with angels and fairies, there's no wrong way. When you connect, you just simply ask. The only thing that I would say is when you ask to be connected to the highest source, to the highest light, to the highest energy that will help you to do whatever it is that you would like to do. Another way of looking at this is that we live in a free will universe. Angels and fairies and other energies that might not necessarily be as benign or kind or benevolent can only really access you to the degree to which you allow. So when you're asking for guidance, ask for the highest, ask for the thing that is at the highest vibratory level that will benefit you the most from the place that you are in your life right now. But that's all it takes, is just asking. And again, there is really no wrong way to do it. Desire is enough. And the other thing is you're already connected. So it's not like you have to get the plug out and put it in the socket. It's there. All you have to do is kind of turn your attention towards it. Okay, so imagination. After my long description of imagination, you can see that that's one way. And so what I like to do is I use my imagination to guide my connection to angels and fairies. So let's say I'm on a hike somewhere, and I want to connect to the fairies. I simply allow myself to tune in to the natural world around me. And then what happens is just the same way I might get an impulse as a child to play, like, there's something by that flower, and I can see it moving, and I'm going to give it a shape and a form and a name, which is what children do when they play. Exactly the same premise. And it exists in the mind, but there's some sort of an impulse there. And you could say, well, did I imagine it or did I download it? And again, the whole discussion on imagination was to kind of help you to understand that the difference between downloading something and imagining something is it really doesn't exist at its purest level. So it's one and the same, even though it's different. So I like to think of it as something with a very thin membrane through which osmosis and diffusion occur. So when you're imagining something from another perspective, you're downloading it. So that's a great way to connect, using the imagination, allowing whatever arises in you naturally, whether it's visual, auditory, sensual, to occur. It might be the wind, and you might feel that the wind is this sort of connection, the wind on your body. So again, using your imagination is a really great way to begin those connections, to fantasize the connection into being. And it's also the way in which we use energetic focus. So let's say you're trying to manifest something, you might focus on it until you have an emotional vibration around it that feels really great. Again, very much a similar premise. It's like visualizing. It's like putting on music and dancing. You raise the vibration. You help to focus your energy. mentally calling. So again, this is just asking. That's another way to sort of make contact with an angel or a fairy. It's where you just simply call on an angel. I'm having a hard time. Let's say you're having a hard time, or you're having a great time. Or a classic example for me might be like, I'm feeling a little scared about something. So immediately what I'll do is in my mind, I'll call in the Archangel Michael and I'll say, Michael, Michael, Michael. And that allows me to create the connection that I'm looking for. And immediately I begin to experience indications that that angelic connection has occurred. Other ways to make that connection are automatic writing, which is something I'll discuss a little bit later, but it's basically just allowing yourself to write what comes to mind. It's kind of like free word association when you talk, but you're just allowing it to come out on the paper. And eventually, the more you practice it, is your ability to start writing wisdom that's coming through your mind gets better and better. And you can say that you're channeling your angel. And if you are purposefully connecting to an angelic archetype, then you'll start to channel the message that that archetype resonates with and brings forward. Again, verbalizing, a really great way of verbalizing, again, is a form of channeling. If you're familiar with Abraham Hicks, Esther Hicks channels Abraham, and she just speaks. This is a real great example of verbal channeling. And part of the things that I say when I'm giving a discussion like this are channeled. Not all of them, but some of them are channeled. Or let's say you're talking to a friend, they're having a hard time, you want to be supportive for them. Let's say you've had that conversation, they walk away feeling like you were really able to help them. And then you're kind of sitting there going, where did I come up with that stuff? Like, I guess I know it, but like, where did those words come from? That's you channeling. And we all do it. We've always done it. It's just the level to which we let it come through. Again, prayer and affirmation, other ways because they raise your vibratory level, and then play and joy. So these are all ways that you can contact angels and fairies. So I sort of feel kind of a little compelled to drop this in here, which I'll come to more in detail at the end. If everything is connected and I can just plug into my source, why am I bothering with an angel or fairy? Why don't I just ask the divine? And certainly you can do that. But as you'll see, as I get into a little bit of the descriptions later on, you plug into an angel or fairy because the divine is a very sort of broad, expansive power. The only one, you could say, depending on your perspective. And translating from that level of energy to a third dimensional point of view on Earth can be very complicated. So what you have here in an angel or fairy is you have a conduit. So it's like a translator, essentially. And their ability to translate different things based on what is associated with their archetype. So for example, the Archangel Michael, known for protection, self-worth, self-esteem, that type of stuff. So when you're dealing with those issues, connecting to the Archangel Michael is really helpful because that angel translates those kind of topics very well. Okay, moving on to the next bit. Feeling them in awareness. So I like to call this all the clairs. We talked about it already: clairvoyance, clairsentience, claircognizance, and clairaudience. I'll get into them a little bit later as we get into getting the message. But basically, seeing things, feeling things, knowing things, and hearing things, basically. That's the sort of brass tacks of it. But I'll go into some of the typical things that happen with all the clairs. You have temperature changes or pressure changes. So for example, I call on the Archangel Raphael often when I'm doing healing work at night. Raphael comes with his own set of archetypes. So emerald green fire is considered an energetic representation of the Archangel Raphael's energy. and the caduceus, which is a crystal rod with golden snakes that sort of move back and forth in a spiral or helix kind of formation, and gold wings where the snakes cross at the top. So those are sort of physical or energetic representations of the archangel, and I'll call on those. And what I experience with this angel is a sense of pressure change and temperature change. I tend to experience, this is me personally, and your experience will probably be very different and unique to you, but I experience Raphael as warmth and more pressure. And I can sort of feel that occurring. Whereas the Archangel Michael and the Archangel Gabriel, I tend to experience as a cooling of temperature, a similar increase of pressure, but cooler temperature. So those are just sort of ways in which I interpret them, but it would be very specific to you how you'll experience it. So you'll notice something, but that will again be like the sound of your voice or whether or not you like potato chips or strawberries or whatever. It's unique to you. Okay, so other ways in which you might see manifestations. Sparks, glowing shadows, what I like to call visual phenomenon. So for many years, I didn't really have any visual phenomenon, but when I'm connecting to angels, I see little sparks of light. And at first I thought, ooh, is my retina detaching? Do I need glasses? I need to go to the optometrist. And really, it's just a phenomenon that happens when angelic energy is near. And it usually happens to me as a form of it's an indication that my train of thought is accurate. So let's say I'll be thinking about, I want to go to the beach today, and I might see a little fleck of purple light. And that'll be a confirmation to me that would be a good course of action for your highest benefit. Or I really need to forgive my mom for this, and I'll see a fleck of green light. Whatever it may be, the sublime to the ridiculous. I kind of think that I'm going to have quinoa for lunch, a flick of white light, So I'm being a bit sort of, mundane about it. But again, these things occur around more complicated issues, but I do tend to see them. Sometimes when I'm afraid and I call on an angel, I'll see sparks. And depending on my level of connection, the more quiet my mind is, often the more mood setting I do, I tend to see those more often. So again, other ways, words and voices. This happens to me a lot and has always happened to me. I'll hear people calling my name. I'll hear directions. Don't do that. And a great way I like to think about this is that we all have different voices in our minds. And this sort of precludes voices that would fall into the category of where you're having a psychopathic break. So we have the voice of our ego, which is usually very loud. And it's the noise and static of our mind. Like, that needs to be better. You should be better at this. You should be that. You should be the other. All of these shoulds, noise, fears, that kind of stuff. It tends to be very loud. And it tends to be very repetitive. And it's usually not very kind. And fears. All of that is what I like to call mental noise. And then we have our intuitive voices, which are our angelic voices, are part of that canon of intuition. And they tend to be very quiet, and they tend to be very persistent, and they always tend to be very loving. So meditation or doing things that create a meditative process of mind help you to hear those quiet voices better. So again, words and voices. You might hear things like, turn left. And you're like, I'm not going that way. But because you've heard it enough times, that little voice just might have something to it. And again, as I said, the computer shut off from the internet knows this much. But when you plug into the internet, you have GPS for the planet. Mm-hmm. So, and you could say when you plug into the universe, you have GPS for the universe and beyond. Again, just a sort of way to think about it. Others are synchronicities and signs. So let's say I am wondering if I should take a vacation, and in my vacation, should I go to London or should I go to Jamaica? And I step out and a billboard in front of me says Jamaica. And then I'm like, oh, well, I guess I got a sign to go to Jamaica. So that would be an example of a sign, a literal sign, but it could be that you're driving along in your car and you're mulling over something and a song comes on and it's like, you know, just dance. And you're like, okay, well, I'm going to the disco. Things like that, where information falls into your mind or comes up in the physical world for you in ways that you understand were meant for you to receive. And a tendency that some of us have, or all of us have at different times, is to ignore them or be like, that's just a coincidence. Those signs usually I have found in my experience and through the writing of many other people tend to be giving you a direction. RuPaul says the universe likes to give you messages and advice, and if you listen to them, you'll hear it. So sometimes, like I'll go into, it might be something as simple as I go into a coffee shop and I don't know what to have. And somewhere, somebody says soy cappuccino. And I'm like, that's what I'm having. So again, signs and synchronicities. This could be like you're thinking of your mom and she calls on the telephone. Or you're wondering if you should take the left or right road and you get there and there's a roadblock. Signs and synchronicities. Numbers. This is something that's really popular at the moment. Angel numbers 333, 22, 11, 33, 44. All of these numbers, I would say integers of 11 are generally what people will say, or treble numbers are angelic numbers. But again, numbers, any number that you see in repetition can have a message for you. So you wake up, you look at your clock. If you get to sleep in, it's 11:11 and you're like, yes, something's right. Yes, you have a question.
My emotions is bad. I cannot, I understand, I don't speak English.
Okay.
I speak French and Dutch.
Okay.
And Bamba. CC numbers. Every time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. All right.
Yeah.
Yes. Yep.
I want to say that. I want my daughter translation to me later. Because
the meaning of the
numbers. I don't
numbers.
understand everything. Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yes, of course. Of course. Of course. Yes.
I swear to God, I'll be saying 11, 11, 2, 2, and 3, 3, and 4, 4. Like, it's been like a whole year now, though. I don't know what that means.
Yes. Okay.
So I'd be like, what's that called, you said?
It would be a type of synchronicity.
Synchronicity.
Yeah, absolutely. You're very welcome. Yes.
11:11. What is 11:11? What's the number?
11:11.
I see it every day, every night.
I see 11:11, and then I see 11 every hour.
And
Okay.
then also,
11, 5:11.
Yeah.
I got a tune on the 11. Like everything is 11.
Okay.
and also I carry the 11:11.
Yes.
I have my phone number is 941-1111.
Okay.
So I carry it. So it's like,
Yeah.
what is it? Like,
What are these
what are
numbers?
these numbers? I tried looking it up. It's just so many
Interpretations.
different-
Yes. I don't really believe that any of those interpretations are wrong. Like one is right and the other is wrong. I believe that what happens is when you come upon a number and you look for an interpretation of it, the interpretation you get in that moment is the one that you need. So there might be, let's say you type in 11:11 to Google and you hit return and it gives you 10 different things, and you hit a specific website because you like that one, and this one gives you an interpretation. If that interpretation really resonates with you, then that's the interpretation you are meant to receive in that moment. Generally speaking, for me, 11:11 is what I call a confirmation or an indication that whatever you're thinking in that moment, you're creating. So let's say you're having negative thoughts. You're like having one of those moments where you're chewing over like Am I going to get into college? Am I going to get into college? Am I going to get into college? And you're worried you're not going to get into college because you didn't have the SAT score that you wanted. Let's say that's the scenario. And you're in that place where you're just kind of chewing that bone. When you see 11:11 and that's happening, it's giving you, this is how I interpret it for myself. Oh, that's what I'm creating. Is that something I want to create?
Making a wish.
Yes, exactly.
I feel like that makes a lot of sense.
Yes.
For me, it's more like assurance. Like every day that I'm seeing it, every hour that I'm seeing it. It's like assuring like you're doing the right thing.
Exactly.
Yeah. Like I feel
Yeah.
like it's my angels. I feel like it goes back to like my angels communicating with me like, hey,
Yes.
how are you? You're gonna have a good day. Like
Yes, absolutely. And I certainly experience it and allow it to be a confirmation number for me.
Right.
So I'm going along and I mightn't be thinking anything in general. I might be like turning the car off to go into work and I'll see,
Right.
I don't know, 511 or something with 11 to it. And I'll be like,
Yeah.
on the right track.
Yeah. It's every day.
Yeah, I
So
saw
I'm
that
starting
this
to.
morning.
Yeah.
Good morning on the way here. I saw 11. I've been seeing like double numbers like every time I look at the clock.
Yes.
55, 55.
Yeah.
55.
Fives I find are, so again, this is just my interpretation. When I see 55 or 555, it's an indication of shifting energy. So the five in the tarot actually indicates a type of change. And when I've looked up 555 or 55, it talks about change in energy. So you're going through a process where something's shifting or the opportunity for something to change is there. And change can sometimes be exhilarating and change can sometimes be scary or other experiences. But again, I would say a great way of experiencing your numbers, because we live in the world that we do and we have these wonderful instruments at our fingertips most of the time, you can see a number, Google it, and find that whatever interpretation you fall on in that moment will be the one that's right for you. You can also, there are many books, websites, and podcasts and YouTubes about numbers and their meanings. You can spend a bit of time doing research, or you might find that you just pick up naturally what that number means. Right. So for many, many years before I looked into meanings behind 11 and 22 were always confirmations. Mm-hmm. Another version of that was let's say I was feeling fearful about something and I wanted to know that the outcome was going to be in my favor. Mm-hmm. I would see purple flowers. Mm-hmm. And purple flowers would be my indication that things would work out for me. And that was something that I chose because I like purple flowers. And I remember sort of saying to the universe, if I'm going to be okay, show me purple flowers. And whenever I need to have a little sort of like, you're right, you're on the right track, everything's going to be okay, I see purple flowers. Mm-hmm. So these are ways in which we can access our wisdom through angels and fairies, signs and synchronicities.
That's good. Thank you.
Yes, of course. So yes, numbers and where were we? Okay. Yes, numbers. All right. And again, we talked about music, song, lyrics, sounds and scents, purple flowers. Maybe you're walking and you hear like wind chimes, and it can be a confirmation for you or an indication to turn in the direction of the sound. You smell a nice scent as you're meeting a person and you realize, oh, this could be an indication that this person is a positive connection for me. Or you're going for a job interview, you walk into the office and it smells nice to you. And you're like, maybe this is a good place for me to work, etc., etc. Nature, again, that being wind, purple flowers, rain. I like rain. It makes me very calm. So let's say if someone's getting married on their wedding day, or it's my birthday and it rains, I usually take that as a positive sign. So just other ways in which angels and fairies and your intuition communicates with you. So getting the message, it kind of falls right in line with being aware of them. But when we get messages, they tend to be a little bit more dense. They have information, actions to take, actions to avoid, guidance, that kind of stuff. This is where you might receive one of the clairs, I like to call. So you might have clairvoyance where you see something very clearly. So you're thinking about something in a meditative state, you've set the mood, you call on, let's say, Archangel Gabriel because you're writing a book. And then you have a very clear image of the book being published, or you have a very clear storyline for one of the characters that was giving you trouble. This would be, and you can see, let's say, that character, climbing to the top of a mountain and sticking in a flag just because that's part of the character storyline. That would be an example of where you're getting a visual source of information. Clairsentience is when you feel something. So let's say I have 4 options and I don't know which one to take. And I'll go through them and I'll just simply say them, one after the other, after the other. And one of those 4 options will have the most peaceful feeling. And that peaceful feeling will be an indication to me that that's the option to take. It does take a bit of practice, and it usually involves quieting the mind and setting the mood and giving yourself a little bit of an entree to that. But as it develops, you get to do it easier and easier and easier. Eventually, you just know. You're like, yes, yes, no, no, no. So claircognizance, that's when the phone rings and you know it's Aunt Susie. Or you know that someone's in the bathroom, so you don't even go over there. You go to the bathroom upstairs. Those are just knowings. And you might know something around a question that you have or a direction to take. You just know it. It's unquestionable to you. And you can't explain that to another person necessarily, but you will know of yourself what the answer is. And then clairaudience. And again, this goes back to when I was talking about voices in your mind. You might just hear, turn left, sit down, relax, and just sit down for a moment. Actually, I'm going to sit down for a moment. I'm going to sit down in the middle so that the camera can still have a good look at me. All right, cool. So the clairs. Other ways you can get the messages are through other formats. So let's say you're looking for something and you might know that it's complicated, or the angels and fairies might have a message for you that's a bit more dense than just a one-word format. So they want to guide you towards something. So that could be a book. It could be a podcast or a YouTube. And the reason I say this is because there are so many books, podcasts, YouTube channels, resources in the world that can help us to access the type of information that can guide us in the right direction. And that's where signs and synchronicities can occur. So a book falls off a shelf, a friend recommends a YouTube, it's the next thing in your autoplay after you've watched your favorite TV show on YouTube or something like that. These are ways in which you can find information sort of cascading into your world. Again, the various forms of channeling, automatic writing or automatic speaking. A little bit on automatic writing, it's pretty easy. You can just get a piece of paper and a pen and start like whatever comes into your mind: chocolate, raisins, wormholes, sunlight, roaches, shiny floor, and you keep going until you start to kind of either get bored of it or it starts to mutate into something else. You'll know, and if you call on your angels and fairies to help come through you, you will find that the messages are usually very quiet, very, very understandable. You'll almost find that your writing and syntax might change a little bit, and it will always come to you in a format that you can understand at that time. So for example, when I do automatic writing, it usually comes through as, dear child of light and love, you are a divine being. I love you. Today is going to be a day unlike any day you've had before. It is beautiful. You are in your divine right action. You are on your path. Continue to shine, continue to stand up and lift your heart up and open yourself to the world that the world might share in what you have to share with it. So that's me verbalizing it, but I could be writing that on the paper. So those are great ways of doing it. You can speak them out loud, or you can actually write them on a piece of paper. Forms of channeling. Other ways are dream work, which just a few notes on dream work. If you would like to connect, angels and fairies often work very heavily with us in our dreams because it's a place where our mental faculty is kind of somewhat shut down. So they're able to feed images and wisdom into our mind at that stage if we ask them to, because there's less resistance to it. So ways in which to work with dreams are, first you set the intention, then get yourself a dream journal or a little type of recording device. I like to use the voice memos on my phone, and keep that near your bed. I like to put things underneath my pillow as a sort of ritual or external note to the universe to say, hey, I'm doing dream work. So I might put a crystal under my bed, or I might put the notebook under my bed, under my pillow, so that I'm giving the message to my brain that I will remember my dreams. I will remember my dreams. I might use an affirmation or a prayer, etc. And it might take a bit of repetition, but once I hold that intention, the mind starts getting the message. And I might wake up to, let's say, pee in the middle of the night, but I'll remember my dream. So what I want to do is I want to, in that moment, write it down. Even if it's the middle of the night, even if I'm tired, I get really tired at that time. So I find voice recording is much better. And then I can listen to it or reread it at another time and then interpret the message. Usually the message is pretty clear and isn't that, hard to understand when you step outside and look at it from an objective perspective. A little trick to remembering your dreams: when you wake up, don't touch your head. So a lot of us touch our head, our ears, and many of us rub our eyes when we wake up. It's automatic. And if you're unaware of it, you might just do it automatically. The reason that it happens is that it's a physiological response in our body. It helps when we touch our heads when we wake up. It signals to our brain that our consciousness is woken up. And then it causes our dreams to fade so that we don't confuse our dreams with our waking reality. That's part of the reasons why our dreams fade, is so that we are able to differentiate between what is in our dreams and in our waking consciousness. So not touching your head, not rubbing your eyes is a really great way to help elongate the period in which you remember your dreams clearly. Other ways, tools. These I love. Cards. I have a bunch of cards here, but fairy cards, angel cards, tarot cards, any kind of cards, pendulums, signs, numbers, which we talked about. You'll see a number, you can Google it and find out the meaning. You can get an app on your phone. Runes are another great way. Any of these divination tools are great. There's one that I'd love to teach you today. So would anyone like to volunteer to learn how to do body dowsing? Anyone?
Why is everyone looking at me?
Yes?
Designated.
Okay. Come on over.
Wait, what am I doing?
Body dowsing. So dowsing is hi, I'm Justin.
Diana.
Nice to meet you. Okay, so body dowsing is kind of like using a pendulum. It allows you to have a yes or no answer.
Okay.
And I find it can, like a pendulum, you wonder, am I moving it or is it moving itself? There's always that question there, but I found it very useful. So what you do with body dowsing is you want to get yourself in sort of a parallel neutral stance where your feet and ankles are underneath your hips, and just try and make sure that your alignment is centered. You can feel that your feet have equal weight between each and equal weight between toes and heels. Allow your spine to be centered. Allow yourself to feel just like a little string coming from the very top of your head that's kind of holding your body just right at the center of your head, and allow your spine to just kind of hang off of that string which is holding you up. Straight spine, equilibrium on the feet, And then just take a few deep breaths. I'm going to have you go ahead and continue to take those deep breaths. Okay. So, basically what we're going to do is we're going to work with the motion of the body forwards or backwards. And we're going to ask the body which motion is yes and which motion is no. So before you do that, we're going to say, let's call in our angels, fairies, and guides for our highest good and greatest joy, that we might have demonstrations and answers that help us experience our highest good and greatest joy. So I'm going to go ahead and ask your body to show me the yes position. And then just allow whatever motion occurs in your body to happen. There you go. So when you feel that motion begin to occur, just allow it to happen. So you can say to yourself, go ahead and show me the yes position.
Go ahead and show me the yes position.
All right. You'll see her body moves forward just a little bit. Now, the more you begin to trust it is, the more your body begins to move. So you can say, go ahead and show me the no position.
Go ahead and show me the no position.
You see her body moves backwards ever so slightly. Okay. So now you might want to ask a question to which you already know the answer. So, a really good one is just to say, like, is my name Justin? You can ask yourself what your name is and see what the body responds with.
Is my name Diana?
And you'll see her body move forward. So now you can ask other questions that you'd like a yes or no answer to. So I'll say, let me see if there's one, because you can also use the other person's body as your tool, because we're all connected to source. So I might ask, let's see, let's would be like something easy and simple. Oh, here's a good one. Will I make dinner for myself tonight? So it looks like I'm going to be making dinner for myself tonight. But really, you can use this to ask deeper questions. I have to say that I've been guilty of using it for whenever I have little worries, like, oh, am I going to get this thing? Or is this result going to be the way I want it to? Or it can be something deeper where you're asking, I would like to forgive someone. Is it the right time for me to reach out to them and attempt that? In person, any variable. So if there's, how is that for you?
It was very, a lot of sensation in the body, just with the continuation of the breath and not like really focusing on the answer or even the question, but just tapping into what you were saying and just letting the body go.
Yeah.
That. So it's super kind of magical.
Do you know what you're having? A boy or
It's a girl.
I was gonna say, like, you should ask it.
Yes, I was thinking about just asking more of is she healthy? Is she in great health?
Yes.
Which, of course, I would just tell my mind yes to keep creating that. It's no worry, but just a question that came up for me. So I'll try that method. Thank you.
Yes, of course. You're so welcome. Thank you.
What's it called?
Body dowsing.
Body dowsing.
Yeah.
It
So
sounds scary. That's why I was like, why is it even moving?
body dowsing.
Like,
It's just like using a pendulum that sort of swings back and forth one way or circles a certain direction to kind of give you a yes or no answer.
Doing that to yourself.
Yes.
By connecting the stream, right?
You just basically what you're trying to do is give your body alignment so that it's in a neutral position. So sometimes what I do is I say, show me my neutral position, and it shows me, and then I'll say, please show me yes. And then I'll tilt forward and I'll say, please show me no. And I'll just wait. And then they'll move me into no. And I'll say, is my name Justin? And I'll wait. And then when it's ready, it moves me into yes, and so on and so forth. It can be tricky because when you're asking yourself a question that has a charge for you, you want it to be yes or you want it to be no, it can be hard to work with getting the answer that way.
So you kind of just gotta release, kind of just let it flow.
Exactly.
That makes sense.
But usually what happens is the mind doesn't like to stay on anything for too long. So if you just kind of, when you have that charged one, you go, okay, I know you want a certain response, but I'm just gonna sit here and kind of watch the mind try to control this. And at some point the mind is gonna stop thinking about it. And that's usually when your body will move. Okay. And then you'll be like, your body will catch the mind. Right. All you have to do is just watch the mind, because the mind will eventually, at some point, because it doesn't like to stay on one thing for too long, it'll let go for a split second, and then the body will move to give you the correct answer. So body dowsing, other ways in which you can connect to angelic forces. So I'm just going to have everybody stand just for one moment, just because we've been sitting for a long time. I'm just going to have you just reach your arms up for a moment for me and just kind of stretch your legs out, move back and forth, move through the space. You can snap and get your energies moving and do little jigs with your body to kind of lift the energy, just be a little bit embodied. And now we can move into the next little section. We're almost there, so soon it'll be coffee time and to be able to go out and hopefully apply some of these things in your life, and I hope it's beneficial. So angels versus fairies. There are two archetypes. And as I said before, angels are, you can sit if you want to, so you don't have to stand. But if you want to stand, you can. So again, just to kind of reiterate, angels are the kind of archetype or entity that I like to say is connected directly to source. And then fairies are also connected directly to source, but usually through other mediums like nature, earth, Gaia, human connection. The sort of original premise for a fairy, there are sort of two sort of premises for the fairy. I'm being very general and broad here. That fairies were actual people who then, by virtue of the change of history, change of power, then became, and also change in consciousness, moved into a different dimension. So that they were human and then moved into a sort of what would be called superhuman or immortal category. And then this other idea of them being like another being with a different properties or different qualities than human beings, but being many of them humanoid in form. So I like to think of fairies and elementals as kind of two basic categories. Fairies being sort of more humanoid-like, and elementals being anything from like a raw energy to a specific type of fairy. Classical elementals in like a European Western tradition are gnomes, which are earth fairies, salamanders, fire fairies, sylphs, air fairies, and undines, water fairies. And those are considered elementals. You can look them up. You might see them represented in different forms and shapes. Elementals are kind of considered very connected to the earth or Gaia, and functioning with that type of elemental energy. And then fairies themselves are, again, like a sort of interdimensional, immortal being that has more of a connection to our three-dimensional reality, because they experience it, whereas you would say angels are primarily not incarnated, so that they generally don't have bodies. But a way that I like to think about angels and fairies, and it's just a little bit of a helpful way to think about things in life, is this idea of dimensionality. So there is this current way of talking about how we are experiencing life, particularly at this point on the planet. And you will hear people say, oh, I'm moving into a 5D consciousness. So you have 3D, 4D, and 5D. So the way I like to think about it is three-dimensional is what we experience and what we learned in science class. It's 3D. We've got up, across, and in the middle. We've got 3 dimensions. And maybe the 4th dimension is time. And so we can talk about dimensionality from a scientific point of view. We can talk about it from a mathematical point of view, or we can talk about it from a spiritual point of view. I'm mostly using the spiritual model here, and I'm just pulling on models as they have been laid out by other people. But I like to use it because I find it's a very useful way to think about life, but also to think about angels and fairies. So when we talk about our three-dimensional world, spiritually, the sort of defining quality of a three-dimensional reality is separation. You and me, us and them, up and down, binaries and multiplicities. This allows us to experience other people and other things as separate from us. And it presents as our primary reality, as sort of our first port of call and the thing that is most real. And it allows us to also have a very hard, a very sort of unelastic experience of time. So we think of the past, the present, and the future. So these are very concrete, or very, what I like to call, very dense perspectives. As you move into the 4th and 5th dimension, this idea of time and separation begins to break down. And we all experience 4th and 5th dimensional things every day. You could say that the internet is kind of like a 4D, 5D experience, because what it does is it breaks down our sense of separation, and we can all be plugged into the same thing and have the same resources at our fingertips. So let's say I was just listening to somebody talk about this the other day. As we move forward in our technological revolutions that are occurring, one of the possible outcomes is that we're going to have self-driving cars. And because of the change in what's happening in our financial institutions, we might have cryptocurrencies, and artificial intelligence, which means that theoretically we could have self-driving cars that take themselves to the gas station and to the mechanic shop and don't have human owners. And all we do is simply order them on our phone. They take us to our destination and drop us off, and then they take care of themselves. And we pay through a cryptocurrency that doesn't go through the banks or a middle person. So that we're all kind of in a matrix where the power lives with the individual and doesn't have to pass through a mediator or a centralizing force, because everyone is plugged into the same set of resources. So that's a sort of 4th and 5th dimensional understanding of what it might be like to live in with three-dimensional resources. But when we talk about five-dimensional experience, imagine what it would be like if I knew what you were thinking all the time, and I knew what you were feeling all the time. Let's say you were really angry because I did something, and then you came and punched me in the face. If I was at a fifth dimensional level of awareness, I would know why you were punching me in the face. I would also feel the emotions that were driving you to punch me in the face. I would experience everything that you were experiencing. There wouldn't be a sense of separation between your emotional experience. I would have access to it. So if that were the case, and it were happening both ways, it would be very difficult for me to be angry at you. And it would be also probably very difficult for you to be angry with me. And if you did have those feelings, we would immediately know why. So if you imagine that you live in a world where there isn't that sense of separation, I feel you on a visceral level. I understand you on a visceral level. I'm connected to you. All I have to do is think about you to know how you're doing today. All you have to do is think about me to know how I'm doing today. When you're hungry, I can feel your hunger. When I'm hungry, you can feel my hunger. That kind of level of connection dramatically changes the way we treat one another. It basically takes our sense of separation and erases it and replaces it with a sense of integration. What this means, the repercussions of this are vast. It would completely change the world in which we live. We would view each other in very different ways. Our behavior towards one another would be different, and on and on and on. I mean, once you think about it, it's like opening a really lovely Pandora's box of what's possible. So the idea and currently is that we are ascending from a three-dimensional reality into a fifth-dimensional reality. But if you look at it on a sort of here and now perspective, we all have 5D experiences. So let's say you're very close to someone, be it a best friend, a parent, or a partner. There'll be moments where you've had, I know what they're feeling. Let's say you have a child. Sometimes parents know when their kids are hungry because they actually feel hungry, even though they've just eaten. So these types of connected experiences that we have are 5D levels of consciousness, or where, for example, someone has an idea about something and maybe they begin to describe it to you, but because you have a connection, all of a sudden you go, I know what you mean. And they don't have to fill in all the blanks because you're able to sort of access the idea that they have in mind. A really great way of thinking about this is, let's take a popular novel. Let's take Harry Potter. Many people have read it, and many people have gone to the movies to see it. And whether or not they loved the movies or they didn't love the movies, you would say that mostly people who go and see the movie who've read the book feel that there's a congruency between the novel experience and the film experience. There's some level of congruency, obviously because they're using the story to generate the film, but visually there's something that's also congruent that you're picking up on. So you could say that when you read a book written by J.K. Rowling, she had images going through her mind as she was writing the book, and then she was describing them in words. When you read her words, because we're all connected in our wonderful, like, universal internet, her words inspire the connection. So basically what you do is you tap into that sort of cloud of visuals that she was seeing when she wrote the book, which is the same cloud of visuals that the people who created the film were tapping into when they were creating the movie. So although there'll be things that you'll say, well, I didn't like that, or that's not how that character looked in my mind, but generally there's an overall congruency. That is another fifth dimensional manifestation, or something that comes out of that ability to connect at that level. Which is why when a lot of people read books, it's not just the words and the meanings and the thoughts and the themes, et cetera, that go into the understanding and experience of a novel. You're also kind of tapping into the person who wrote it, images and the visceral experiences that they were having and putting into the novel. The reason that I bring this up is because our 5-dimensional reality tends to be how we think of our spirituality. So a really great way of thinking about this is, again, going back to the smack. Let's say you get smacked by someone, and from your perspective, it was unfair. Like they had no right to hit you, right? I've had experiences that are a little bit more dramatic than that, but we'll keep it to a smack, and we'll use the smack as that example. I got smacked. And from my point of view, it wasn't fair that I got smacked. And I could say to myself, I had a choice where I could say, all right, I'm going to make sure that everyone know that I got smacked, make sure that the person who smacked me is held accountable for their actions so that they don't smack someone else, and then go and get therapy for my smacking because I was violated. And that would come, you would say, out of a victim consciousness, and not necessarily calling it victim in a negative way, but calling a spade a spade. So you could say it would be important for the person who smacked me to be held accountable for their actions. It would be important that, we live in a safe world and that actions are taken to ensure that people just don't get smacked, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That would be a very 3rd-dimensional response, and a very responsible one, and ones that the vast majority of us might say, yes, this is the action that should be taken. And then when you look at it from a 5th-dimensional perspective, it doesn't preclude the 3rd-dimensional response. Like, I might need to protect myself, or it would be wise that people are held accountable for their actions. It doesn't preclude that. But in order for me to move past it so that I'm not remaining at a victim consciousness, I then go into a 5th-dimensional perspective, which is to say, how did I attract that into my life? Not that it was my fault that I got smacked, but what in me, what resonance in me brought that into my life. Now, in that moment, I am not saying that what happens on a 3-dimensional level is unnecessary, but I am going to this other place where I'm sort of claiming responsibility for my life. And it takes me to a different level of understanding, because at that level, I am stepping away from being in a victim consciousness and saying, I'm going to accept responsibility for my life. But I also have to shift my perspective on the person that smacked me. And I start to see how I might have attracted them into my life. What am I learning from them smacking me? Like, it might be, maybe I'm learning that when I vibrate a certain way, I attract a certain type of energy. But I also might be learning that I am having compassion for the person who's smacking me, because their smacking is also coming from some place that might be difficult for them. So they just don't smack for no reason. And by virtue of doing that, I'm accepting responsibility for myself. I'm beginning to shift my perspective on the other person. And in order to really allow myself to forgive them, I have to begin to see them in the way that I'm seeing myself, in that we are both coming from a place of being vulnerable. We're both having this experience of life and trying to maneuver through it. And at that moment in time, them smacking me seemed to be, even if they knew it was wrong, the thing that needed to happen. So that sort of shifting, where you begin to not see the other person as other, and you begin to take responsibility for what's occurring in your life and incorporating that person into your worldview. In other words, seeing how we're interconnected and how my fingerprints play a role in their action toward me, begins to sort of change the paradigm. It stops being me and the other and starts becoming us. So that's the difference between one of the ways in which I like to delineate 3 to 5D. I would say it's sort of inversely proportional to the actual sensation of density. So the less density, the higher the number; the more density, the lower the number. But the reason that I bring it up is because angels tend to work really well with 5D. So when you're moving out of separation into this kind of cosmic oneness, fairies tend to help you deal very well with three-dimensional issues from a fifth-dimensional perspective, because they actually experience 3D. They have bodies, they are incarnate or have been, or they deal primarily with elements that exist in a three-dimensional reality: fire, earth, air, water. So for example, fairies would be very aligned with nature, the environment, environmentalism, sexuality, physical things, healing certain aspects of the body, plant medicine, ayahuasca, peyote, etc., 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 taking herbal supplements, all of those type of things. Angels are aligned with some of those deeper existential questions. And it doesn't mean that fairies can't answer existential questions and angels don't deal with three-dimensional issues. It just means that those archetypes tend to work well with those environments and those energy formats. And you might find that they become active at different times or places. So like being in nature is a very easy place to connect to angels and fairies, but you might find that you connect to fairies very easily in that space. So looking at angels now, just as sort of stepping away, there are different angels and different angels have different archetypes. I just wanted to introduce you to a few of them today so that you'll have some that you can go look up online if you're not familiar with them. But I'm just going to give you an angel, some of their key words, just kind of as we looked at the elementals here with the fairies. This is just to kind of give you a little look into what angel I might call on for what reason. So I'll start with Azrael. And these are angels that are just coming primarily out of the Judeo-Christian model, but they're angels, as I said, in every cultural tradition and in various archetypes. So Azrael would be the angel of death, is otherwise known as the angel of death, but Azrael is known for helping people cross over at the time of death and helping people deal with grieving. The angel Ariel is an angel that works with divine magic. So how we employ creative energy, essentially. So how we create what we'd like to create in life or get in line with what the universe wants us to create. Manifestation. And Ariel works very closely with nature and fairies. Shomuel, relationships and career purpose. Gabrielle, artistic endeavors, writing and media. Hanael, healing, psychic energy, grace and the moon. Jeremiah works well with prophecy, life review, and change. Jophiel, beauty, creativity, and slowing down. Michael, protection, worthiness, courage, clearing, and your life purpose. Raguel, meditation, harmony, and justice. Raphael, healing, travel. When you're going to go on the plane, you can call on the Archangel Raphael. Clearing, animals, and also working on addictions. Raziel, alchemy, or again, divine magic, esoteric information, manifestation. Uriel, again, alchemy, magic, changes in the earth, nature, wisdom, and the weather. And then Zadkiel, compassion, forgiveness, memory, finding things. If you lose something, you can call in the angel Zadkiel, and sexuality. And then two of the other angels that I like to bring up, which according to the Bible had physical lives. So you would say the angel Metatron was Enoch, and the angel Sandalphon was the prophet Elijah. But Metatron usually works with children, spiritual understanding, organization, and what would be called Buddha or Christ energy, or central sun energy, if you like looking at it from a universal spiritual point of view. And then Sandalphon works with music, prayer, pregnancy, and the crystalline earth grid. So those are just some things you can Google. You can look up angels. You can look up their meanings if that works for you. You don't really need to have a super deep understanding of an archetype to call in it. As long as you're calling in that which is for your highest good and your greatest joy, and you're connecting to the highest source and the brightest, most loving energy for your joy and healing and transformation, you're always going to pull on the aspect of any archetype that will be right and in the highest vibration for you. So that kind of leads, it concludes my discussion today. I'd like to open this up before we finish. I know we've been here for a long time because I can talk a lot. But if anybody has any questions or anything that they'd like me to go over again, please feel free to let me know. I'm quite happy. We can discuss some of those things now or after, if you prefer to be off microphone. Yeah. Any questions?
Thank you.
Oh, you're very welcome. Thank you all so much. Yeah.
Il faut lui dire, tu veux sans microphone. Tu veux pas être avec lui seul. Hein? She like be with you alone to talk.
Yes,
And,
that's absolutely possible.
It's
Yes.
possible?
Yes,
Okay.
yes. After.
Thank you.
Of course, of course. It's my pleasure. It's my pleasure. Well, thank you all so much for coming. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Have a beautiful rest of your day. And also, just so you know, Liberate has a wonderful podcast, Liberate University, Liberate Podcast. We also have all of these wonderful tools here for you to purchase if you like. And if you want to work with any of our healers or practitioners, you can make appointments right there at the front desk. Thank you so much for coming in today, and have a beautiful rest of your day.
You too. Thank you.